In a small town in Ohio, witnesses, including police officers on patrol, have reported seeing something unusual near the banks of the Little Miami River. According to these reports, the creature did not resemble any ordinary animal. It was described as a humanoid figure, standing about 3 feet tall, with rough, wrinkled skin and a face that looked like a frog. For years, many people treated these stories as nothing more than a curious local legend. But something changed when new reports began to emerge. And this time, the witnesses were not just local residents. Some of the accounts came from police officers on patrol, men trained to notice details and accustomed to dealing with unusual situations as part of their job. According to these officers, what they saw that night did not resemble any animal they would normally expect to encounter in that area.
The creature was reportedly seen near the road, close to the river. When the car's headlights illuminated the figure, it stood up on 2 legs and quickly disappeared into the darkness. Stories like this could easily be dismissed as exaggerations or momentary confusion. But what makes this case more intriguing is that the reports did not happen only once. Over the years, different witnesses have claimed to see something very similar, always in the same area. And that is exactly why this story continues to be remembered today. After all, what exactly did these people see along the banks of the Little Miami River?
To understand how this legend began, we need to go back several decades, long before the reports involving police officers, long before the story gained attention beyond the town. It all begins with a single report made back in the 1950s, and it was this first encounter that gave rise to what many people today call the Loveland Frog.
To understand how this story began, it's important to look at the place where everything happened. The city of Loveland is located in Ohio, in the United States. Today, it is known mainly for its green spaces, bike trails, and parks that follow the course of the Little Miami River. The river has flowed through the region for thousands of years and is part of an extensive natural network that runs across the state. During the day, the area is usually quiet. Residents walk along the trails, fishermen spread out along the riverbanks, and families spend time in the local parks.
But at night, the landscape changes completely. Sections of the road that run alongside the river become dark and silent. In some areas, the vegetation is dense and public lighting is limited, especially near the water. In places like this, unexpected encounters with animals are not unusual. Raccoons, deer, and other wildlife are often seen crossing the roads in the area. Even so, some residents believe that something far stranger may have been seen there over the decades.
Over time, stories began circulating among the town's inhabitants. Reports of an unusual creature seen near the river occasionally appeared in local conversations. Eventually, these stories became part of the region's folklore. Some people treat the so-called Loveland Frog as nothing more than a curious urban legend. Others believe the reports may have originated from real encounters with something that has never been fully explained. Regardless of the interpretation, nearly every version of the story points to the same place, the banks of the Little Miami River, and it was there that the first recorded sighting is said to have taken place, a report that emerged in 1955 and ultimately gave rise to the entire story. In the middle of the night, a man was driving along a road near the river when something caught his attention. What he claimed to have seen that night would become the first known account of what is now called the Loveland Frog.
The first known account connected to this story reportedly occurred in 1955. In the early hours of that morning, a businessman was driving along a road near the Little Miami River on the outskirts of Loveland. It was around 3:30 in the morning. According to the account that later circulated in the region, he was returning from a business trip when something unusual caught his attention along the side of the road. The man slowed his car after noticing several figures near the river. At first, he believed he was looking at animals, but when his headlights illuminated the area more clearly, the scene appeared far stranger.
According to his description, there were 3 creatures near the road. They were estimated to be about 3 to 4 feet tall. What stood out the most was the appearance of these figures. He claimed the creatures had rough, almost leathery skin, similar to that of a reptile. Their hands and feet appeared to have webbing, like those of an animal adapted to the water. But the most unusual detail was their heads. According to the man, their faces resembled that of a giant frog.
Some versions of the account also mention an even stranger detail. One of the creatures appeared to be holding something that looked like a wand or elongated object. The man reportedly claimed that this object emitted something resembling sparks or light.
night. This detail eventually became one of the most controversial elements of the story. For many researchers who later examined the case, it raised questions about the reliability of the account. Even so, the testimony continued to circulate in the region over the years.
At the time, there are no clear records indicating that an official investigation was conducted regarding this first sighting, and for many years, the episode was treated as nothing more than a curious local story, a strange narrative shared among residents of the area. But nearly 2 decades later, something happened that would completely change how this story would be viewed.
New reports began to emerge, and this time, the witnesses were not just ordinary residents. They were police officers on duty, accounts given by people trained to observe unusual situations, who claimed to have seen something very similar to the creature described in 1955. It was after these encounters that the story of the Loveland Frog began to attract much greater attention, and the first of these reports occurred in 1972 during a nighttime patrol near the river.
From a distance, he initially thought it might be an injured animal, perhaps a dog or some other animal that had been struck by a car. But as he approached in his patrol vehicle, the situation quickly changed. When the headlights illuminated the figure on the road, the animal, or whatever it was, stood up on 2 legs. According to the officer's report, the creature was about 3 feet tall, with wrinkled skin and an appearance that resembled a large frog. Its eyes reportedly reflected the headlights intensely.
Before the officer could get any closer, the creature jumped off the road, crossed a small guardrail, and disappeared toward the river. The incident would already have been strange enough on its own, but not long afterward, another police officer from the same town reported a very similar encounter. The second account came from Officer Mark Matthews. He was also on patrol when he claimed to have seen a creature near the road.
Just like in the first case, the figure initially appeared to be an ordinary animal, but when it stood up on 2 legs, Matthews said he realized it did not resemble any animal he recognized. According to some versions of the story, the officer even fired his weapon at the creature. Even so, it reportedly managed to escape into the darkness. No body was ever found. No dead animal was located in the area, and without any physical evidence, the case ultimately remained only as accounts recorded by the officers themselves.
For many people, that detail is what kept the story alive. After all, this was not just a local rumor. 2 different officers had described something very similar in the same location, and both claimed to have seen the creature near the Little Miami River. Over time, these reports helped transform the story into something much larger. What once seemed like a curious tale shared among residents eventually became known as one of the strangest pieces of folklore in Ohio. But the story would grow even stranger, because years later, one of the officers involved in the case would change his version of what happened.
Nearly 2 decades after the first report, the story began to attract attention once again. This time, not because of local rumors, but because of reports made by police officers. The incident reportedly occurred in 1972, once again near the Little Miami River, close to the town of Loveland. That night, police officer Raymond Shockey was on patrol, driving along a road that runs beside the river. It was late at night when something unusual appeared on the road.
As the years passed, the reports from 1972 continued to be repeated in books, news articles, and discussions about unexplained phenomena. For many people, the fact that 2 different police officers had described something similar in the same location seemed to give the story more weight. But sometime later, an unexpected detail emerged. In interviews conducted years afterward, police officer Mark Matthews presented a different explanation for what may have happened that night. According to him, the creature he saw on the road was probably nothing supernatural. Matthews suggested that it might have been a large iguana, possibly missing its tail. According to this version, the animal may have escaped from someone who kept it as an exotic pet. This explanation began to be frequently cited whenever the case of the Loveland Frog was mentioned. However, it also raised new questions. Iguanas are not native to Ohio. They naturally live in much warmer climates, such as tropical regions of Central America or the southern parts of North America.
For that reason, some researchers who examined the case considered this explanation unlikely. Even so, without physical evidence of what was actually seen that night, the iguana theory continued to be one of the most commonly mentioned explanations. And as often happens with cases like this, new stories began to emerge over time. Decades after the encounters reported by the officers, people in the area once again claimed that something strange might still be seen near the river.
Some more recent reports mention a similar figure being observed close to the water.
water, especially at night. There are even accounts of a video recorded by local residents, although the footage is extremely dark and difficult to interpret. Nothing in the recording clearly identifies what is being seen. Even so, the fact that new witnesses continue to mention something similar has kept the story alive to this day.
Over the decades, the so-called Loveland Frog has become more than just an isolated report. The story gradually became part of Loveland's local folklore, referenced in city events, murals, and even small statues scattered around the area. And that raises an interesting question. Cases like this do not happen only in Loveland.
In many parts of the world, stories about mysterious creatures emerge under similar circumstances. Accounts that begin with only a few witnesses and that, over time, eventually become part of local culture. And it is at this point that the story of the Loveland Frog begins to connect with other similar phenomena.
Cases like the Loveland Frog are not unique. In different parts of the world, there are reports of strange creatures that appear for a short period of time, are seen by a few witnesses, and then disappear without leaving conclusive evidence. Over the years, many of these stories eventually become part of local folklore. Some of the best-known examples emerged in the United States. One of them is the case of Bigfoot, a creature supposedly resembling a large primate that has been reported in forests across North America.
Another famous example occurred in the town of Point Pleasant, where multiple witnesses claimed to see a winged humanoid figure that became known as the Mothman. Stories like these tend to share several common elements. The sightings usually take place in natural areas, at night, or in locations with limited lighting. Witnesses describe something that appears almost human, but at the same time, unlike any known animal.
And in most cases, the phenomenon occurs for a relatively short period of time before disappearing again. Something similar also happened in Massachusetts in the late 1970s with the case of the Dover Demon. At the time, teenagers reported seeing a small humanoid creature walking near a rural road. Just like in the case of Loveland, the sightings occurred within only a few days and were never clearly confirmed again afterward. This type of pattern raises an interesting question. Could all of these reports share a similar origin? Or might each case have a completely different explanation? In an attempt to answer that question, several theories have been proposed over the years. Some of them are quite simple. Others enter the territory of speculation. And in the case of the Loveland Frog, three main explanations tend to appear whenever the story is discussed.
Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain what witnesses may have seen along the banks of the Little Miami River. None of them has fully answered every question, but some explanations appear more frequently whenever the case of the Loveland Frog is discussed. The first is the simplest explanation, the possibility that the witnesses saw an ordinary animal that was misidentified. In dark environments with limited lighting and only a few seconds to observe something unexpected, perceptual errors can occur.
An injured or frightened animal may move in unusual ways. Distance, the glare of car headlights, and the element of surprise can turn a brief encounter into something far stranger in a witness's memory. In this context, the theory later presented by police officer Mark Matthews that it may have been a large iguana would be an attempt to explain exactly that kind of situation. Another possible interpretation is that the story gradually evolved into a local legend. Many towns have similar stories. Curious accounts begin with a single witness, are repeated by others, and over time eventually become part of a region's cultural identity. In that sense, the Loveland Frog could be viewed as a cryptid, a creature whose existence has never been proven, but that remains present in popular imagination. It is the same category that includes stories such as those of Bigfoot or the Mothman. There is also a third hypothesis, a far more speculative one. Some enthusiasts of unexplained phenomena have suggested that certain reports of this kind could be related to sightings of unknown origin. In some cases, these interpretations are associated with aerial phenomena or possible extraterrestrial visits. This idea emerged mainly during the 1950s and 1960s, a period when reports involving unidentified flying objects became widely discussed in American culture. Even so, there is no direct evidence linking the Loveland case to that type of phenomenon.
And as happens with many similar stories, none of these theories fully explains every detail of the case. In the end, what remains are the accounts, testimonies from people who claim to have seen something unusual near the river on different nights across several decades. And it is precisely this persistence of the story that keeps the legend of the Loveland Frog alive to this day.
Stories like the Loveland Frog occupy a curious space between folklore and mystery. Over the decades, different people have claimed to see something unusual along the banks of the Little Miami River near the town of Loveland. Some of these reports can likely be explained as encounters with ordinary animals, misidentified in low light conditions. Others may have grown over time, turning an unusual event into a story repeated across generations. Even so, one question remains.
If everything was simply a case of mistaken identity, why did such similar reports continue to appear in the same location? Was it merely coincidence, or did some of those witnesses actually see something they could not explain at the time? Today, the Loveland Frog has become part of the region's folklore, a curious story that continues to be remembered whenever the subject turns to mysterious creatures.
And perhaps that is exactly why stories like this continue to survive. They exist somewhere between what we know and what we are still trying to understand. Now, I'd like to hear your opinion. What do you think those witnesses really saw that night along the banks of the Little Miami River?
If you enjoy stories about mysterious creatures and unexplained phenomena, you might also want to watch the video about the Dover Demon, another intriguing case involving reports of a humanoid creature in the United States. And if you'd like to follow more cases like this, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on the video. It helps the channel continue bringing new stories like this one. See you in the next archive.